Try to be brief.
Are you all set over there?
Yep.
Look, they have zero evidence that says the privileges or immunities clauses not only apply to citizens. They are relying on a spillover argument that cannot solve as good as the alternative. They've conceded a multitude of arguments why the court will be able to reinterpret the notion of the affirmative plan in order to only allow it to apply to citizens. We're also literally the only team reading evidence on that point. This is the two pieces of Harrison evidence. All of their Andrews evidence says that if you were to do this, the people might be able to reformulate it, but it never speaks to the fact that the privileges or immunities clause is something that only applies to citizenship of the United States. They have conceded the Bergen 2002 evidence, which is not only our impact evidence along with the racism argument, but also our alternative evidence that says that you should reject that notion of human rights and instead ground human rights in the notion of the non-citizen, of the refugee. We will win arguments why this is net beneficial. Line by line. First, on the framework debate, they have no argument. They've conceded a couple of arguments. First, the only impact of these arguments are predictability and topic education. They've conceded the argument the affirmative does not have a right to predictability. You have infinite prep time. This is also a new affirmative, which means you do not have a right to negative predictability. The negative has a right to predictability in the context of this. You've also conceded we solve topic education because every single link argument that we've read is based off of the plan text, which means that if you are holding that you are topical, we are clearly having a topic educational discussion. You also have no trade-off arguments to why our interpretation is worse. You conceded that you must defend epistemological methodological assumptions, and unlike the other round wizard, there's only one epistemology to that plan, this plan, and it is the notion of citizenship and rights and the privileges or immunities clause, which we are winning offensive to. They've also conceded this is key to negative ground and predictability, because without this it would take away critical negative ground, which is the only way we can check back on predictable affirmatives by ensuring that you defend the political theory, which is much easier for the negative to predict than it is for the world of the affirmative. It is also a one-shot deal. If you adequately defend your theory, then you get to gain access to the plan. We're not saying the fiat goes away, we're rather saying this is a prerequisite to fiat. You've conceded this argument, which means that if we win this framework debate, it is a reason why you should have to win the argument that grounding rights and citizenship is good before you're allowed to access the advantages of the plan. Permutation. They've conceded some solvency deficit arguments. First, they've conceded it's a do both permutation, which means if we win any kind of solvency deficit reason, you prefer the alternative of the world of permutation. They've also conceded several arguments. A point is that the court would interpret the plan to not change the privileges and immunities clause. This evidence is very good. We have several pieces of evidence to support this argument. A point is the Jenkins evidence. The Jenkins evidence is devastating impact. It says in the world of the permutation, because the plan is concluded, we can always divert back, and you carve out exceptions to human dignity grounded the notion of citizenship. Our evidence says this is the most violent form of state deception because it takes away the things that allow us to articulate our subjectivity as human beings. Our evidence says that this is what allows us to wipe people off the face of the map. Cross-apply all of their structural and boundary-making violence inevitable arguments. The 2AC and the 1AR both concede that this is the most important impact of the round because it is the root cause of racism and violence. B point is the Destro evidence. This is the evidence specific to the notion of desegregation in the Fourth Amendment. It says that this allows them to carve out exceptions, which mean would exclude non-citizens. They've also conceded the logical argument I made in the 2 and C that think about in the context of today's court. If the court had a way to interpret the privileges and immunities clause in order to exclude non-citizens, they would jump on it. They never answered this argument, especially since we're the only team reading evidence to support the way the court interprets its privileges and immunities. They've also conceded the Chaplain evidence and the emergency rollback of Gammon evidence read in the 1 and R. Both of these indicate that there was always a solvency deficit because in the world of the permutation, the inclusion of the plan means that you are demarcating a separation between the world of the alternative and the plan, and you are all demarcating the boundaries for the existence of educational rights in the context of the United States. They've conceded that this is the internally to our sovereign power DA that I extended at the top of the debate. The Gammon and no date evidence also says the permutation would inevitably, there would always be a solvency deficit because it would be rolled back in times of emergency. Our evidence says that whenever you use the law as your foundational moment to articulate your values, then in times of emergency, the government can always roll back. They concede this argument, which means that they can never win solvency in the world of the permutation. There's always no more than a residual risk of the link, especially in the context of the specific Harrison link arguments articulated at the top of the debate. Now, their net benefit arguments. We solve all of their root causes arguments. The only net benefits they have are that the law is good, but they've conceded that this is not a law criticism. This is the way the law has shaped its self-criticism, which means we're not mutually exclusive with the notion of law in and of itself, but we do solve the root cause of how law comes to articulate violent articulations of communities in the status quo. They've also conceded that our evidence says that if we start from the non-citizen, we can reformulate all rights, which means your court action is not relevant. We will never claim to do the plan, which means we don't link to your floating pick argument, but desegregation becomes a secondary consideration according to our evidence because we are a more foundational moment of articulation. They've also conceded that sorry, I just don't know what that means. They say that if we use the law, they say textual competition. They've conceded that we are textually competitive with the affirmative plan. That we're also functionally competitive. This is better for negative ground because it's the only objective standard. It's also more predictable, and all of our link evidence comes off the plan, which means there's no reason to reject or to vote for the permutation. That is. Now they say the alternative solves because we have to have a universal embracement, and then modest demand is better than radical rejection. They've conceded a couple of arguments. First, the McKillen 2005 evidence, as well as the Burke evidence I explained above, say that we are not a whole radical. We are not the kind of radical democracy that their evidence talked about. We're not saying we should reject the entire system. Rather, we were saying at the foundational moment of its inception, we should re-articulate it. They've conceded the McKillen 2005 evidence says this is an everyday struggle, which answers their modest demand argument. They've also conceded there's no impact to this modest demand argument. Even if they win 100% that a modest demand can be good, they've conceded that their modest demand is grounded in the idea of citizenship. This is a link argument that none of these net benefit arguments solve back. Even if they win that the law can be a good thing, they are conceding a specific scenario about the way that the law works to exclude people, which means none of these net benefits outweigh the disads that are articulated at the top of the debate. I've already talked about the racism as well as the Burke evidence. Floating picks. We're not a floating pick. We will not claim to do any of the affirmative plan. We are merely claiming to solve the root cause. They have no argument as to why that makes us a floating pick. They've also conceded a slew of arguments why predictability is negative, right? They have to win an overwhelming link to this, especially in a world in which we're not claiming that we overturn the Millikan decision. We just make desegregation an irrelevant concept because we've changed the way that human rights are formulated in the first place. Now, I've already answered the answers debate about them transforming the docket. Group the two starting point debates about privileges and immunities in the piece of evidence he read. He just conceded the argument the only impact of this argument is the notion of human dignity. I've already extended the dissad of this argument at the top of the debate. That conceptualization of dignity is grounded in the citizen versus non-citizen division, which means even if you win a conception of human dignity, this means we have a dissad to the affirmative case, but you've conceded that you allow exceptions to the creation of human dignity to occur, which means it's not unique offense for you. You say that we will rebuild, but we required to look at the totality of the decision. This is an irrelevant argument. If this is true, then you should look at the totality of the alternative, which is I've already articulated above as to why there's a solvency deficit, and they say exposing the division is key to solve, but if we win our internal link argument, it proves they recreate the division, and don't forget, we're seniors and this is our last ceda. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah.